When we think of Thanksgiving, most of us picture warm tables, family gatherings, and a national story about peace and food and just coming together and having a good time. But what if the story we were taught was only half the truth? And the missing half explains the hunger, inequality, and injustice we see today. What if understanding Thanksgiving honestly isn't about guilt, but about clarity, courage, and the collective work of building a future that is rooted in truth? Today, our topic is Feast or Famine, Rethinking Thanksgiving through Indigenous Eyes and Modern Inequality. We're going to pull the curtain back some on the mythology of Thanksgiving and dive into the realities of Indigenous generosity, colonial violence, and the modern systems that still determine who gets to feast and who is left to famine. Welcome to Rethinking Freedom. I am your host, Aya Fubara-Eneli. And as always, we bring scholars and organizers, artists, healers, and everyday people whose insight helps us to reimagine what freedom should look like, to reimagine justice and community and liberation in our politics, in our families, in our bodies, and in our daily lives. And today, I could think of no better guest than the amazing Dr. Travis Armstrong to help walk us through figuring out the truth behind the mythology of Thanksgiving. I'm going to share just a few words about who Dr. Travis Armstrong is. He is a respected Indigenous scholar, he's an educator, and he is an advocate whose work bridges history, sovereignty, public health, and contemporary struggles that are facing all of us, but let's talk specifically also about Native communities. Through his scholarship and public engagement, Dr. Armstrong has helped countless people unlearn harmful myths and understand the living legacy of colonialism while highlighting models of generosity, community, stewardship, and care and collective well-being. There is so much that I can share about Dr. Armstrong. He specializes in pre-colonial Africa and 19th and 20th century African American education. He retired from the United States Air Force in 2014 after 23 years of active duty service. Thank you very much for your sacrifice.
Thank you.
And he currently serves as the community outreach coordinator of the Foot Soldiers Journey organization, led by his cousin, because sometimes these things run in families, Thomas Armstrong III, an original 1961 Mississippi Freedom Rider. So, I always encourage our guests and our listeners to take notes. So you might want to go back and research Mississippi Freedom Riders, or perhaps we'll bring Dr. Travis back with Thomas Armstrong III to tell us a little bit more about that.
Yes.
Dr. Armstrong contributes to Historian Speaks, the Good Men Project, and is a guest writer for the historic African American newspaper, the Jackson Advocate. He also serves on committees and boards, including the Mississippi and Alabama Departments of Archives and History, the Prentice Mississippi Normal and Industrial Institute Partnership Team, and the Mound Bayou African American Museum Advisory Board. He holds degrees in business administration, a Master of Science in Business Administration from Touro, am I saying that right?
Yes.
University International. He also has a Bachelor of Arts in History from the University of Maryland Global Campus and a Doctorate of Education in Educational Leadership from Trident University International. And he is a two-time graduate of Egyptian Kemetic Study from the University of Ipet-Isut at Waset Kemet. And I actually got the honor of meeting him in Kemet. For those of you who are saying, where is Kemet? That would be modern Egypt. Born in Prentice, Mississippi, he now resides in Texas with his wife of 34 years, an incredible woman in her own right, whom I have come to love, named Denise.
Yes.
Dr. Armstrong, welcome to Rethinking Freedom. How
Thank
are
you.
you today?
I'm doing great. Great. How are you today? Good to see you again.
Doing wonderful and really excited to have you here. So, today we want to talk a little bit about Thanksgiving because as people are listening to this, they've probably made, if they're fortunate enough, they've made a list of food that they're going to cook for Thanksgiving later this week. For those of you who are in the international world, it's Thanksgiving week in the United States of America. And many of us will have all kinds of dishes laid out.
Mm.
We will have family. We will gather. We will sing. We will eat. Some will watch. I think it's basketball. There's always a Thanksgiving game, I think, and
Normally,
football as well.
yeah, yeah.
So there are some of us who are going to be having a really great time. But if you're like me, there may be a part of you, even as you celebrate the day off and time with family, that may also be thinking about the origins of this holiday.
Mhm.
And for me, it always just seemed a little weird to be celebrating, although I take every opportunity to enjoy family, but to be celebrating.
Yes.
So let's start there. So many Americans still picture pilgrims and the indigenous people, the original Americans. So when we're saying go back to your country or leave our country, it's like if you're not an indigenous American, you're an immigrant here too. But
Absolutely.
most of us still picture pilgrims and indigenous Americans sharing a peaceful feast, just having a great time, and that's the origin of Thanksgiving. From your perspective, what actually happened and what do people need to understand about this holiday?
Well, it's a lot. Well, thank you for the introduction. It's great to be here. Great to talk to you. And before we begin on that, I have to say the last iteration that you and our good brother Addis Soji did on women and resistance, Miss Osceola McCarty, I have to say that is in my neck of the woods. Uh, Grew up in Prentice, Mississippi very quickly, me and my wife Denise, which is about 30 minutes from the University of Southern Mississippi, where Miss
Wow.
McCarty did her life's work as a washwoman, to somehow rub together, as my grandmother would say, two nickels together and save about $150,000 to donate to students to get them through school. And so the University of Southern Mississippi is very prominent in my family, in my wife's family. She attended for some time. She has sisters who graduated from there. My niece and nephew just graduated from there a couple of years ago. So Miss Osceola McCarty is one of the true people that we stand on their shoulders today, who was community. She was community. And that community of Hattiesburg, Mississippi has produced so many of our freedom fighters that we know, many we don't know, as Miss McCarty, Dr. Amos Wilson, Mr. Vernon Damer, the Ladner sisters, Dory and Joyce Ladner. So that part of Mississippi weighs very, very much on again, the people that showed us that we stand on today. So I just want to let you know that that hit us right, where we know it, 30 minutes down the road from where we both grew up. So thank you for putting Miss McCarty's name, putting some respect, as they say, on her name, and letting the world know who she is. And hopefully people will go out and learn more about her. Y'all go out and watch that Women in Resistance video. But with that being said, as you said, the myth of Thanksgiving is something that we've all grown up with here in the United States of America in particular. The origin story of that, I will, we always got to bring out our sources in what we talk about.
Yes.
I'm going to read one quote before I get to that I think kind of encapsulizes the idea of Native people and their relation to Europeans. And I'm going to
Okay.
read this book, The Trail of Tears, the story of the American Indian removals. even though it's some 2 centuries almost after what we think of the beginning of Thanksgiving. But I think, again, this encapsulates uh, where it comes from. And this quote is from Chito Harjo, who was a Creek Indian native chief. And very quickly, he said, away back in the time in 1492, there was a man by the name of Columbus, came from across the great ocean. Now we know all know that Columbus didn't make it here to America, this America. But again, one of those myths.
One of those myths.
Uh-huh. And he discovered the country for the white man. What did he find when he first arrived here? Did he find a white man standing on the continent then? I stood first, and Columbus first discovered me. Columbus first discovered me, meaning we were already here. We've been here. They were here for thousands of years before the white man or the European was even a figment of their imagination. So I think what we have to go back to is thinking about the way that we've been socialized to think about certain things. And the holiday of Thanksgiving, really the actual official day that was proclaimed by President Lincoln in 1863, is not that long ago. But this origin story of the Mayflower pulling into Narragansett Bay or Cape Cod on the eastern shore of the United States of America, and these Europeans getting off the boat and being met so graciously by people who are already there. That myth has to be dispelled.
Yes.
Because what was going on at that time in that particular part of the country, you had the natives on one side of Cape Cod fighting other tribes at that particular time. Pestilence, some say the smallpox, chicken pox, those infirmities that the natives had gotten from other Europeans who had trekked there prior to 1620, because those native tribes were trading with English fishermen who were coming, who had came there previously. So they had encountered Europeans already. But and when the Europeans came, you hear stories or you hear history about how filthy European cities were. And so bringing all of that across the water into a place where people who lived off the land, whose natural immune systems were not used to that sort of thing, they encountered these people and passed on disease to people who had no defense for them. And so those things decimated a lot of that population. So when the Mayflower pulls up in 1620, the native people were cautious. And as we see in a lot of myths, you will have natives running to the seashore to greet these people. That was not the case. The Maraponos who were there at that time, they lived along the coastline during the summertime, and they built seasonal houses. They buried their dead there during the summertime. But when the winter came, they moved more inland to do more hunting, more shelter, and things of that nature. So 1620, when the Mayflower pulls up, they don't see anyone because the tribes had moved more farther inward land. So this myth that they were greeted with open arms there at the point of origin is certainly a myth. And so it took time because, again, these tribes were warring with each other. They were in a state of warfare and trying to exist and survive away from warfare and pestilence and the absence of food during that particular time. So they just saw this as another liability that they were going to have to deal with. And so this myth that this first Thanksgiving was one of joy and camaraderie is certainly a myth, because prior to 1863, when President Lincoln made the last Thursday of November a national holiday, and we'll talk about a little bit later what was going on with that. We all know 1863, what was going on in this country. That was really, Thanksgiving wasn't really celebrated in this country. You had local traditions going on the northern eastern seaboard at that time, but the idea of a full-fledged Thanksgiving where natives and the Europeans sat down and traded corn and beads and had a feast, that was not the case. Now they did, after some time of getting acquainted, they did form alliance, certain types of agreements where, because the natives understood that once they came, those Europeans came, more were going to be coming. So
Mm-hmm.
they had to figure out a way to exist on their own land that they had been on for thousands of years in this new threat that was coming in. So the myth has to be dispelled that this was some kumbaya moment that we learned about in school.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I referenced this book here, This Land is Their Land by Dr. David Silverman, uh, who is a professor of Native American history at George Washington University. And the title of this book, This Land is Their Land. And I don't know if many of viewers may remember, I remember in school myself, we had to learn this song, This Land is My Land, this land is your land. We had to recite that, you know, along with the preamble of the Constitution. We just
Mm-hmm.
we just had the anniversary of Gettysburg. We had to memorize the Gettysburg Address. All of these things that create myths in this country that are antithetical to what is actually happening to indigenous people, to African people who are human trafficked here, uh, and the somewhat convoluted and controversial relationship between Africans and Native American people. Uh, so all of these things are myths. And David Silverman writes very eloquently that uh, these myths create a sort of false narrative amongst all people, and it belies your consciousness that they will have you, or they had us, celebrating something that was the cause of our demise. You know, he writes in the book that he interviewed a young lady who,
Celebrating something that was the cause of our demise. That is,
yeah,
I would say that is the ultimate definition of power, to get people to celebrate the thing that brought about their own.
dem- demise,
Yes.
demise.
Wow.
Yes. And so, you know, he interviewed a young lady who went to public school in the 70s. She was the only Native student in her class. And, you
Mm-hmm.
know, every year you go through this rendition, you have the Thanksgiving plays, you dress up as, pilgrims with the big hat and the big belt buckle.
I have a picture of my daughter, second grade, dressed up as a pilgrim.
Yeah,
Imagine that.
that's
Yes.
right. That's right. And then somebody's got to be the Native person. You know, somebody's got to wear the feathers and all this regalia that they put on you. And she said she felt very, very isolated and very hurt that she was being used as the prop for Native myth telling, and how that stuck with her for the rest of her life. And so again, we all uh, enjoy this time during with family, and that's how we were brought up. Particularly in Mississippi, you know, that was the time of the year to get together with family and see people that you hadn't seen before. You know, you were going to eat good,
You're
eat
gonna
very
eat
well.
good.
You're
Yes.
going to eat very well. So that was a great time, but nobody ever, even in our educational system, nobody ever stopped and said, okay, this is the true reality of what really happened and why it's so detrimental to our society that we perpetuate these myths. We perpetrate these myths on our people.
I think
And
it's important if I can add here, because I know we're going to get into Lincoln actually proclaiming Thanksgiving and who benefits from this myth making, if you will. As I was doing my research, again, trying to figure out how, even as I host Thanksgiving meals at my home, that I also educate us, that I also not being a Debbie Downer, so to speak, but that I share the truth.
right.
I, as part of my research, I found out that the first official English Thanksgiving proclamation was in 1637.
Mm-hmm.
And it was issued by Governor John Winthrop of the Massachusetts Bay Colony.
Mm-hmm.
And specifically, what they were celebrating was the massacre of the Pequot people
Mm-hmm.
in Mystic, Connecticut.
Yeah.
And by the way, you all, as you learn the states of America and even some of the cities and the names of waterways, rivers, so on and so forth, you need to also ask yourself, where did these names come from?
Absolutely.
Name like Connecticut, like Tennessee. These are all lingering evidence of who originally owned this land before we started naming places Georgetown and things of that nature. So back in 1637, over 700 Pequot men, women, and children were burned alive or shot.
Mm-hmm.
The survivors were sold into slavery in the Caribbean or given as slaves to the colonists.
Yes.
And the proclamation called for a day of thanksgiving to God
Yes.
for this victory.
Yes.
And so for me, when I'm talking to my family about Thanksgiving, sometimes I'll call it thanks-taking as well. It's like, is this really a day of joy, or is it a national day of mourning?
Mm-hmm.
Should it be a day of remembrance? Should it be a day of resistance? And of course, the holidays expansion we know was political. So can you share a little bit about how did Abraham Lincoln come about now setting this as a national holiday?
Well, if we remember 1863, we were in the third year of the Civil War.
Yes.
And frankly, Abraham Lincoln had just fired George McClellan, who was the top general for the Union Army. And McClellan ends up running against Lincoln in 1864 for president, but Lincoln wins, of course, re-election. And we all know what happened in 1865. But a young lady comes to Lincoln, a lady by the last name of Miss Hale, Hale.
Sarah Josepha Hale, yes.
Comes to Lincoln and said, Mr. President, we need something to bring people together. Now, again, what's going on around us? The Civil War, brother against brother, African people fighting for our lives and for our freedom. But we need something to bring us together. And Abraham Lincoln decides to, again, say, well, let's make the third Thursday of November Thanksgiving. So we can have this feeling of nostalgia and family and really think about things aren't so bad. However, again, we have 2 more years to go in a fight that the Union is losing. Okay. If it weren't for 2 black men, Frederick Douglass and Martin Delany, walking into the White House and telling you, hey, man, we losing this war. Here's what you need to do. If you want to win this war, you need to put guns in the hands of black men. And somehow they convinced Lincoln, okay, we need to raise these regiments of black men. The 54th.
Wait a second. You're busting another myth. Are you saying Black people, African Americans, weren't just sitting in the fields, lazy, waiting on white people to lose their lives for their freedom? That's not it?
No, they're sitting around.
Lincoln didn't just give us freedom, no?
No, they're sitting around in the cotton fields with their shirts off, watching Eli Whitney create and patent the cotton gin, that myth. But anyway, you're exactly right. Approximately 180,000 Black men and women. When we add in, of course, Miss Sojourner Truth. I'm sorry, Miss
Harriet Tubman. Yes.
Miss Cathay Williams, and
Yes.
many other unnamed women also who fought on the side of the Union for their freedom. The myth is, they fought for the Union. No, they were fighting for their freedom. They were fighting for their freedom.
That's
And
right.
shout out to Dr. Frank over at the African American Civil War Museum in DC, who just had the reading of all the names of the Black volunteer soldiers of the Union Army a couple of days ago.
Yes.
Appreciate them doing that. So that's a big deal. But Lincoln is trying to find a way to put a salve over what's going on in the country. So that's how that holiday myth comes about. So, and again, the myth of, and then you begin to see the myths of, again, these plays, this information coming out. You have artists painting, what they think to depict that the first Thanksgiving was about. But again, a lot of them were uneducated, but they also had that mindset of European colonialism. Mm-hmm. So that filters into our school system, yes, into our religion, okay, into every aspect of society in American life. And here we are today in 2025, still perpetuating that myth.
That's actually right. And again, I encourage people. Paula Giddens wrote a book that I was first introduced to over 30 years ago during my undergrad years called When and Where I Enter. And she got that title from a book that Anna Julia Cooper wrote called A Voice from the South. Mm-hmm. But what that book engendered in me was just always this question of anytime I'm reading anything, reading history in particular, I ask the question, when and where do I enter? Right. When and where do people like me enter? When and where, who's part of this narrative and who has been left out? Right. And so we need to remember that in the 1800s and the early 1900s, you talked about the Trail of Tears. Andrew Jackson, President Andrew Jackson, who is a hero of the current felon in chief who is residing in the White House, what's left of the White House. Mm-hmm. We have to understand that during this period of time, the United States of America was waging wars against Native nations. Right. Sometimes African Americans were conscripted to be part of that force against them. Right. They were forcing children into residential boarding schools, Native children into residential boarding schools, stripping them of their culture, their name, how they wore their hair, everything. Right. Assimilation, right? That's the integration is leave your culture and become mine. That's right. Although we'll never quite totally accept you. That's right. They were criminalizing Native languages and religions. But at the same time, introducing this notion of a peaceful feast and all sides coming together and singing Kumbaya makes colonization appear peaceful.
That's right.
Because now, instead of looking at the fact that this is a murderous group, mm-hmm, quite a few of them let out of the prisons of Europe, right, and sent over here. Let's just keep it real. When the felon in chief talks about they're sending their criminals, it's a projection.
They are the original.
And listen, and I'm not making this up. I'm not disparaging anybody. It is fact.
That's right.
That many of the European ancestors, the colonizers, were people who had been convicted of crimes,
right,
and were now sent here. So now through this myth making, you make colonization appear peaceful. Right. You erase massacres.
That's right.
You erase land theft. You erase forced displacement. You talked about disease. And the facts are that they actually would bring blankets
That's right.
that people who were suffering from smallpox had used,
That's
and
right.
they would give them as gifts
That's right.
to the native population, knowing that it would spread like wildfire, literally,
That's
and
right.
kill them off.
That's right.
Of course, it promotes this notion of this myth making of Thanksgiving, promotes American exceptionalism.
That's right.
And then it assimilates waves of European immigrants into this patriotic story.
That's right.
So, who benefits from this story? We're kind of giving you guys a lot of context clues, but who benefits from this story? And how have all of us living in the United States, many of us, not so much the indigenous people, how have we bought into this myth and bought into celebrating our own demise?
Well, I would go back to, you mentioned, again, we're talking 2 centuries between almost the Trail of Tears and the 1620, so about.
Yes.
In between that time, uh, approximately 5 to 10 million Native people die off. Okay.
5 to 10 million. So
Yeah.
when we talk about the Jewish Holocaust and act like that was the only genocide in the history of the world,
Yes.
there were others.
Yes.
Carry on.
As you mentioned, disease uh, is one way. And you remember when I had to remember also when Europeans came, uh, Native people, whether it's here in what we know as America, whether it's on the African continent, indigenous people hunted for necessity,
Yes.
food, shelter, clothing. And then they reinstituted remains back into the land to regrow, to renew. Well, Europeans came, they hunted for sport and for uh, money. Okay. We saw almost the elimination of the buffalo during that period. Native Americans starved, went unclothed during the winter because a lot of Europeans hunted for sport, okay, and for money. So we see that, and on into the Trail of Tears. As a Mississippi native, the Mississippi, named after the Mississippi River, is a native word. The Choctaw, the Chickasaw up north, the Biloxi, the Pascagoula Indians down native down south on the Mississippi Gulf Coast. All of those people were moved out during the Trail of Tears. Okay, so that left the entire state of Mississippi was created in 1817. You had Europeans from England, from Ireland come in to do what? Of course, involuntary servitude was going on, but also timber was a big money producer. So they
Mm-hmm.
came into the Mississippi River Delta and cut timber, started these large timber companies, okay, where natives once lived, once inhabited all those thousands of years. So they come in, cut timber off the land, and that's a large reason why Andrew Jackson moved native people out, was for economic purposes. Not also that he hated them, he was a rabid racist, but economics, as you say, perpetuating the system of capitalism.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, was one of the main reasons. Land, timber, water, all those things were very, very important
Mm-hmm.
in a capitalistic society. And then you bring in Africans to work that, for
Yes.
no money. You know,
You mean that the lazy Africans were brought into work?
yeah, those lazy, dumb people
Okay.
who have no civilization or no history, as some white historians would say, they had no history. But you bring them in to grow cotton, rice, indigo,
Mm-hmm.
all sorts of foodstuffs. You know, artisans of metal, building all sorts of things, waterways, you name it, we did it. You know, so that word capitalism uh, is a very, very systematic way of making sure the haves have and the have-nots don't have any. You know, And so the moving out of Native Americans, of course, there's a sort of history between uh, Native Americans and African people, because some Native tribes did uh, enslave Black people, particularly the Choctaw, like right here in Mississippi. You
Mm-hmm.
know, one of our counties is named after uh, LeFleur Greenwood. There's a county named after him, and the county seat is named after him. He enslaved hundreds of African people. So that's a very sort of history that we really have to talk about. But we can't push a blind eye to what Europeans did in the pestilence, not only with disease, but the pestilence of greed, of hatred, of displacement, forceful displacement, did to disperse them. And as we see now, I don't know if you saw a couple of days ago that the Trump regime, I don't call it an administration, I call it a regime, because the definition of a regime has authoritarian traits. So I call it the Trump regime. They just wiped off of one of the governmental websites. There was a database that was created in 2020 of missing and exploited Native.
Indigenous women. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And they wiped it off of the government website because they said it violated DEI protocol. I was like, are you serious?
They are serious.
Serious?
They are serious.
So we have to be very clear on what we face, what we have faced in the past, and how we perpetuate those myths that drive current policy as well.
That's so important that you say that. Again, you all know, if you've been watching this show, we are always going to give you information that you can go back and research. So go and look at the Trail of Tears. There were not wagons and trains set up to move people. First of all, you shouldn't be moving them off their land.
That's
but
right.
Thousands of people died. Indigenous people died.
Right.
You also brought up the buffalo, and I just want to share some quotes, because again, whenever you're busting a myth, people want to hold on to those stories that they feel good. We have great memories with, mama and papa and all of that with Thanksgiving. And what are you trying to say to me now? You don't want me to have a good time? But I do want to share some quotes on what American leaders said regarding the Native Americans, the indigenous people, and buffalo. Mm-hmm. They said, this is from Colonel Richard Dodge in 1867, "Every buffalo dead is an Indian gone." Mm. General Philip Sheridan in the 1870s praised hunters for destroying the Indians' commissary, because the Native American population used every part of the buffalo. The buffalo was very important to their entire livelihood. Even the dung from the buffalo was used to heat. Yes.
That's right.
General William Tecumseh Sherman, 1875, urged the government to let them kill, skin, and sell until the buffalo is exterminated. Mm-hmm. And you can go into the history books and see pictures of mounds of buffalo bones.
That's right.
So when today you see wealthy, mostly white folk, people of European descent, traveling to other countries for the sole purpose of killing off beautiful animals.
That's right.
And mounting their carcasses or their heads or whatever, and just taking pictures. Hey, I just killed a rhinoceros. I just killed another endangered animal. It didn't start today. Yes. So as we talk about Thanksgiving, feast and famine, and understanding what the origins of this story are, let's bring it to present day in the time that we have. What do you see in terms of how we are celebrating this holiday and the inequities that we see existing? The government just reopened. Mm-hmm. People were literally going hungry in the so-called richest nation in the world, mm-hmm. the so-called greatest nation that has ever existed. Right. How do you see the origins of this myth looking at feast and famine and the policies that are still being put in place today, and who has and who doesn't.
Right. I was looking at a stat the other day, and from 1998 to 2021, I believe, the top 1% had garnered more than 101% more uh, money, more wealth than the median household, not the lower poverty, but the median household, 100 and more times the wealth during that particular time. It's even more now, of course. But, and as you watch, if you watch television and you see commercials for like Target, for instance, are we still boycotting Target? You
We're,
know,
we're still boycotting Target. I know I am.
I know, yeah, I hardly went in there anyway, but
Yeah,
certainly
exactly.
not now. But people are acting like things are going about as usual, you know. And I think, I don't know if people really understand the calamity that we are in this country under this regime. You know, when you have the current president and the Congress, who this president that doesn't know what a tariff is, and somehow he can't get it in his mind that he's taxing his own people just off of a whim because he doesn't like what a foreign leader said, but you're going to basically tax your own people, then and Congress has totally abdicated their responsibility as a check and balance, then we really don't understand where we are in this country and as economically.
Mm-hmm.
But I think some people spoke during the November 4th elections that can, I think, be a preview to what's, if we make it 2026 November, that can, well, we can kind of run these people over, metaphorically speaking, at the ballot box. Then hopefully people will pay more attention here in what we need to do, because particularly looking at my state, home state of Mississippi, we made some great strides in that particular election because it broke the back of a supermajority.
It
Now,
did.
Republican supermajority who have been in power for many, many years. So that tells me that people are awake and are really thinking about what's going on in these short 10 months that this regime has been in power.
Just 10 months.
Just 10 months. So, and now you have the people on Wall Street who are nervous about the economic outlook of 2026. You know, healthcare will come January 1st. A lot of people's healthcare is going to just double and triple, you know, and there's no guarantee that, and Dr. Carr calls the MAGA Muppet Mike Johnson, there's no guarantee that he's even going to bring that up for a vote. That those 8 Democrats said, you know, who went against the other Democrats,
Yes.
you know, said that they made a deal that, you know, we'll see, but I wouldn't hold my breath on that, you know. So come January 1st, a lot of people are going to be financially, going to be really hit hard in the pockets with uh, increases in premiums for their health care, you know, and
Yes.
it's going to be a real calamity for a lot of people, unfortunately. So those myths play directly into that. Certain people, mainly Europeans, you know, think that they know better than anybody else, and they don't listen to the people who actually lived experiences uh, count for more than their white supremacist type of thinking, and that's all it is: white supremacist thinking that I know better than anybody else. You
But
know,
what's so crazy about that ideology is that it is hurting white people as well. When we look at the creation of what we now call the United States of America, the only people who really had rights were
mm-hmm.
white men with property.
Property. That's right.
And you see that distinction even today. So although there are a lot of white people who are buying into the notion of whiteness,
Mhm.
and feeling that as long as I can claim I'm white, that puts me in a position of superiority over other people. These policies are impacting everybody.
That's right.
So the hunger is not just in Native American families, which by the way it is,
Mhm.
or in Hispanic families, or in African American or Black families, or in Asian families.
Mhm.
There are
Right.
a great number, millions of white Americans, those who consider themselves white Americans, who are also suffering from these policies. So whether you look at the minimum wage,
Mhm.
federal minimum wage, having been frozen since 2009.
Yes. Yes.
So if you graduated from college or high school, whatever, you went to work, and the minimum wage 16 years ago was $7.25. And
Mhm.
today in 2025, even though everything, the cost of living has gone up, you're
Mhm.
still, the minimum wage is still 7.25.
Yeah.
And we don't seem to see that is a problem. Now you add these taxes, the tariffs that you mentioned, you're taxing people who are already not making a whole lot of money,
That's right.
again, to line the pockets really of his family, for the
That's right.
felon in chief, and then his cronies, those who put him in power.
That's right.
Then you add the healthcare situation, where we already were at a crisis, because compared to other so-called developed nations,
Mhm.
America's healthcare system is probably at the bottom.
That's right.
Now you compound that issue with even people who, under the Affordable Care Act, which you people don't realize, that's also Obamacare. You think Obamacare, I'm going to oppose it,
Yes.
allowed people with pre-existing conditions to get coverage. That is going away in January,
That's right.
and that is going to be hugely problematic. There's so many issues. And then of course you look at this recently, what happened even with the government shutdown and SNAP benefits.
Yes. That's right.
The fact that you have so many working families
Mhm.
that are still so poor they qualify for SNAP.
That's right.
And then we are wondering, well, why should people be on SNAP? The government shouldn't have to help them. But you have no problem giving all kinds of welfare and tax breaks to
Mhm.
the super wealthy
And you gave 40 billion to some other
country.
regime,
Yes,
$40 billion of our tax money
yes,
to prop up some other country. Okay. Uh, Without congressional consent, of course, as always. But that's our money, that's our tax dollar. And then people have the nerve to complain about a family on getting SNAP benefits who are working people, as you mentioned, they're working people, okay, but don't have a living wage. That's not their fault.
yes,
They're doing everything they're supposed to do, but
yes.
this capitalistic system is squeeze, squeeze, and squeeze. you know so and this other myth that's being bubble that's being burst is that black people and other brown people we are the majority on these benefits, when that myth is being bursted day in and day out. If you look at the farmers, what they've been going through since the tariffs, that myth, well, it should have burst back in his first administration. But again, they voted against their own interests in terms of, you have a man who is sourcing out, putting tariffs on the very crops that they create. So all of these myths in relation to uh, Thanksgiving, the myth of white supremacy, the myth of this capitalistic society being a humane system, you know, but we all have to work within it. But from what I see now, a lot of people are going on as business as usual. You know,
So pushing this even beyond just our borders of the United States of America, how do you feel like, or what do you think about the ways that this colonial logic, because this Thanksgiving holiday started with this colonial logic, right? We're going to displace people, we're going to take their land, we're going to kill them off, and we're going to say nothing to see here, just stay focused on this other stuff here. How do you see that shaping even decisions about who gets support within the United States and outside of the United States? Because we've also seen the United States withdraw aid um, to many countries and punish countries based on whether they choose to take their deportees and so on and so forth. How do you see this colonial logic continuing to play out domestically and globally?
Now, if you remember the first iteration of Trump, when he called African countries shithole countries.
Yes.
Okay, I think everybody remembers that. Now, in this second iteration, now you want African countries to take take immigrants, okay, that you illegally rounded up here in this country, you know, and you want African countries to take them in. That is peak colonialism, because why would somebody take in people that you, as a white supremacist country, illegally imprisoned? Why would you do that? That is peak colonialism. Okay.
Yeah.
And now you're threatening a sovereign nation, Nigeria, that, oh, you all are mistreating Christians. Now, I'm not saying that I know all the particulars about what's going on in northern Nigeria in regards to Christians being murdered or killed. But the peak of white supremacists is, I'm telling you as a sovereign country that, hey, you all are persecuting people that we like, so we're going to come in with guns a-blazing. Those were his words.
Those are his words.
Those were his exact words. We're coming in guns a-blazing, you know, because we don't like what you're doing with this Christian, white, basically Christian nationalism, white Christian nationalism. So, you know, I foresee it playing out that as we see more and more countries are pushing back against more and more, thankfully, particular African countries, hopefully they will continue to do that. But countries in South America, China, of course, Brazil, of course, you know, those particular countries that make up BRICS, you know, who've been pushing back against United States for some time now. Hopefully that will continue to, you know, break the back of that white supremacist attitude that we're just going to do what we want to do. So, you know, we'll see.
So as people go into this holiday, what are some different ways that they can celebrate it? How do we bring back this notion of generosity? One of the things that Indigenous people here in America and in other parts of the world should be known for is that we had this very symbiotic relationship with our environment, with our land. There was this sense of truly being relational. Yes, did we sometimes have skirmishes and so on? Yes, we did. But what advice or what would you suggest for people who are saying, oh my God, this is news to me? How do I incorporate this information that I'm getting now into our celebration of Thanksgiving?
I would say just get back to the basics. You know, again, I use my life as examples. You know, growing up in Mississippi, it was all about family. You know, during this time of the year, of course, you had people coming in that you hadn't seen in a while. You know, I knew my mom, my grandmother, my mom's nieces were going to cook. We were all going to be together during that time. And I think we need to get back to that. And also, we have to understand that we have to work together as a community. Get back to that as well. You know, when I did my dissertation, it was in reference to how Black communities came together to fund and build their educational institutions outside of white philanthropy. And when I interviewed these elders, about 30 of them from Texas all the way to Alabama, They all had certain themes or certain words that they use, hands down. They all use the verbiage community, working together, cohesion, uh, things, words like that. And they said, they will always say that we have lost that. These next generations have lost that. So we really need to get back to that. And we also need really educate ourselves on a little bit financially on what we can do as much as we can. I understand everybody's in a different situation, you know, but they're being intelligent about where we spend our money as well. Shop
Mhm.
black-owned businesses, so our money can circulate within the black family or black community. If it's a family-owned restaurant or shop with black businesses,
Mhm.
money in our pockets,
Yes.
because as we know the statistics, whites have at least 10 times more wealth than black people in this country. And it seems that gap is growing more and more. So we need to really get back to the basis of family and community and working together, taking care of each other, and putting our hard working money, dollars into black owned businesses as much as we can.
I thank you for sharing that. A couple of things that you referenced that I wanted to just point out to people is you brought up women and resistance. For those of you who are interested in watching that episode on Miss McCarty, if you go to Adesoji Speaks Knowledge, we'll have it on our YouTube channel. We'll have it in the description with a link. You can watch that. You also referenced Dr. Carr. And for those of you who are not aware, if you go on not Facebook, if you go on YouTube and search for In Class with Carr for 297 weeks and counting. Every Saturday morning, he comes and he teaches and shares a lot of great information for us.
Mhm.
Definitely one of the things that all of what you said, I co-sign. I would definitely say, people, this holiday season, do not go and take your hard-earned money and just buy and consume and consume. Ignore the commercials, turn the TV off,
Yes.
spend your money, save your money.
Mhm.
We don't need all of these things that they tell us that we have to have in order to live well. We really don't. And for those of you who are interested, we're going to have another segment. It's not going to be on the radio show, but if you come to our YouTube channel, we're going to have another segment where we're going to explore a little bit about the indigenous peoples and their form of government and this idea of generosity and reciprocity. Because again, we're in a country now where we have no problem with wealthy people gathering more and more wealth,
That's
but
right.
we want to demonize members of our community who need some help, the elderly, people with disabilities, children. There are millions of children going hungry
That's right.
in the United States of America, which should be unconscionable to all of us. There are ICE goons right now terrorizing communities and people, which should be unconscionable to us. And so, in the spirit of Thanksgiving, like Dr. Armstrong said, we should be thinking about how we come together as a community, how we take care of each other, understanding that what happens to one impacts us all, whether we want to realize it or not.
That's right.
We just have about a minute or so. So if you want to take like 30 seconds and share any last thoughts with our audience, Dr. Armstrong.
Just reiterating, paying attention to what's going on, that can solve a lot of problems, or educate you on what's going on, and just being aware, again, just with this new, the holidays is going to put a lot of people in a daze. Okay. And then January 1 is going to come up, and then it's going to be business as usual. And a lot of people will have slept through that. So we really need to stay vigilant as much as we can over this time period, so we can be prepared for what's coming up in the new year.
Vigilance. And I think it was Ida B. Wells, I think, who said the price of freedom is eternal vigilance, I believe. So,
Another one.
Dr. Armstrong, thank you so much for joining us. I hope that you will return, because you have so much knowledge in so many areas that I would love to explore with you. But sharing the truth behind Thanksgiving. And if you're listening to us, come back on our YouTube side and leave us a comment. It helps with the algorithms. Our goal is also to hit 10,000 subscribers by the end of December, the end of this year. but we want to hear your thoughts about what you've heard and whether any of this was new to you, and if it's going to change what you do with your family and the knowledge that you share with the younger generation at Thanksgiving. We
That's
do wish everyone a day of remembrance. I'm not going to call it Thanksgiving, a day of remembrance. And please honor the original owners of this land. Thank you all for listening. Thank you for watching. And thank you, Dr. Armstrong.
my pleasure. Thank you.